The earnings gap setup is one of the most powerful and repeatable entry tactics that you can learn as a swing or position trader. Just in this past week, we've seen incredible moves after earnings in stocks like Tesla, Palantir, LUMN, Reddit, ALAB. There's been so many, especially in this market cycle. And every earnings season, there are tremendous opportunities that you can capture if you learn and master this entry tactic. And that's what this video is all about. I'll be talking through my recent trade of UPST, which I took today. The overall stock was up about 46% today. That's a powerful move. And I was able to capture a nice 70% gain with a quarter of my portfolio. So I'll be talking through, everything from the setup, what I look for, what I'm doing pre-market to prepare, where I decide to enter, and where I decide to ultimately sell this setup. So the earnings gapper, very, very powerful. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So first, let's go ahead to the daily time frame because this is where everything starts for me. What I'm looking for with the earnings gapper is a stock that's early on in its trend and ideally within a longer term consolidation, a nice big base. And in the past, I want to see that's been able to gap up and make consistent moves from it. We've seen that from UPST for quite some time, even going back to its massive run here in 2020. It had a really nice move from an earnings gap. So that's always really beneficial for me. Second, I always consider with any trade, regardless if I'm using an entry tactic like the earnings gap, or whether it's a base breakout or pullback setup, I want a stock that's in theme and in play. And right now, of course, AI is a driving force. And this company is related to AI. They basically apply it to the financial space to basically calculate better loans for them. And basically, it's on theme. So that's another thing that I'm looking for. Then with an earnings gap, I'm looking for, some sort of catalyst. With this stock, in this case, basically they had reported earnings the day before on November 7th. They surprised by 59%. You can see right here, they lost less money than was expected. And that's often enough. You want to see a beat on earnings, on revenue, a dramatic announcement during the earnings report, but it doesn't just have to be on earnings. We saw a stock like ASTS earlier this year. They had announcements on earnings, but it was more, the gap was more to do with the partnerships that they were setting up to basically facilitate their business. So it has to basically be a game-changing catalyst that changes how institutions are viewing that stock. And with UPST, we bring up that chart again. Obviously, you had earnings. They beat on earnings as well as a little bit on revenue as well. And you could see in after hours that the institutions were accumulating stock and it was going to gap up the next morning. And every night, especially during earnings season, I run a screen for earnings gappers, positive movers, and earnings gappers, negative movers. And this is my dashboard here in Deep View. I set it up so you can click any of these names and you can bring up the chart, watch the after market price action. I was watching Docs as well, which also had a nice earnings gap today. But you can see UPST right on this list, up about 15% in after hours. And very critically, this was on enormous volume, 37% of the average 50-day volume. So a normal trading day, it was trading about 37% of that average volume in post-market. That's pretty significant. Anything over kind of 25% of average volume, I take notice of. You can see down here, AVXL, not sure about that company, but it's not trading that much in terms of post-market volume. You want to see big volume because that's a sign that institutions are involved. And UPST was on this list and it made it onto my daily focus list for the next day to trade, ideally a gap and go, which we did end up getting. Additionally, with UPST, it's heavily shorted, which can add fuel to the fire. And as I mentioned, it's got that character of prior earnings gaps and resulting runs and strong moves on that first day. I was also watching this stock pretty carefully. It's been on my newsletter many times. We had this nice base and really nice tight areas that would have been great entry points earlier on. I could have sold into strength right here. And it set up a nice consolidation, mini consolidation within this overall consolidation right here. And it was set up really nicely and primed for a nice move like this. So once it's on my radar, once it's on my daily focus list, and each day I pretty much focus on max 2 to 3 names. That helps my personal execution and make sure that I get the most out of the opportunity, whether it's an earnings gap or a base breakout, move up the right-hand side, pull back, undercut and reclaim of the 21 EMA, whatever the entry setup and tactic I'm using, I try to limit it really to 2 to 3 names. As I mentioned, that just helps me execute that much better, make sure I'm managing my risk correctly, and just get the most out of that opportunity. So this made it onto my list, and it was the main name that I was watching that day. It was the #1 name. And for earnings gaps, basically what I'm looking for is immediate demand. I immediately want to see it move powerfully off the open. Sometimes they pull back a little bit and then form a nice upside reversal and then rally up strongly. But from my experience, the gaps that work the best, there's immediate demand and immediate volume coming in, and this had enormous volume. And what you can do in Deep View is look at the run rate here, throughout the day. And this is basically the time-based relative volume compared to normal. So 100% here would be normal. It was moving at, plus 600, 700 early in the AM. And that's when you know that there's going to be huge volume like this, huge institutional interest throughout the day. So it ticked all those boxes for me. Then for me, when I'm trading these earnings gaps, I'll be looking at all time frames, but for execution, I will be looking at the 1 minute chart. And this is kind of the one instance where I do look at a time frame as low as this. And let's go ahead and hide this for the time being. And to execute this, as I mentioned, I want immediate demand. And for this one in particular, I took the 1 minute opening range breakout right at 68.31 was my entry price. As it moved higher, we did pull back slightly, and then the next bar it took out and continue to rally throughout the rest of the day, as we'll get into as we talk through the position management portion of this trade. But I took it right above the opening range on the 1 minute chart. Sometimes you get a pullback, upside reversal, a mini base that forms here, and then a breakout from that. I actually prefer that than a stock that just pushes strongly off the open. But you basically want to look to find a spot where you can manage risk, and then it's showing demand. So whether that's after a mini base and it tightens up again and then pushes out of that, that's playable. Or in this case, an opening range breakout, that's playable as well. To manage risk, I set my stop right under the low of this bar. I set my initial stop 65.97. That was my initial stop. And then as we progressed and pushed higher, I didn't want to take a loss on this. I know it's a heavily volatile name, so I basically moved my stop up to my cost basis as soon as it was around this area right here. Then from that instance, UPST, didn't really present any frustration or threats. There wasn't much pressure. It kind of acted as the best ones do. They just trend and move higher. They base, push off, base, push off. And once I'm out of my entry area, I'm no longer looking at a 1 minute chart. I'm not looking at all these short-term reactions. I'm moving up to a 5 minute and 15 minute time frame, and then just watching the general action. Once I've got a nice profit cushion, my stop is at break even. And basically I was moving up my stop at these higher lows and looking for a change in character and a change in trend. And that did occur later on here, but first, early after it pushed higher, at this point around, I moved my stop up to break even to make sure I didn't, let this turn into a loss after a great profit. And at that point, as I mentioned, I'm putting my stop up and rising it as the stock makes progress for you. So after this great upside reversal, I adjust my stop under this spot right here. Then we form this a little bit longer intraday base. As we push higher from that, then I move my stop just under this low. And then right here, this is where it gets kind of key. I noticed that we were stalling a little bit, especially this candle right here. We weren't moving at the same rate as we were kind of prior in the session. And I got a little bit more on the defensive. And as we form this candle, I think after this candle as well, I noticed this kind of short-term shelf that lines up with this high. And I adjusted my stop to just under this low right here. And I liked how that lined up with the 10 EMA as well. That was curling under price. And I did end up getting stopped out here for a nice 17% profit. After this, undercut, it did shake out and eventually move a little bit higher, move down, move a little bit higher as well. But I was happy with my piece of the move, the meat of the move. That's what I'm focused on. And I think it was a pretty good sell. Looking back, I think my entry could have been a little bit better earlier on. But in terms of the sell, I think my rationale was sound. I got a nice piece, and it ultimately just kind of stagnated and moved sideways. I'm definitely open to re-entering if it does kind of present another entry tactic for day 2 or later on if it flags out and then pushes higher. But in terms of the sell with this, in terms of completing this individual trade, I'm pretty happy with how I managed things. It was a pretty easy one, to be honest, because it pushed right away. The best ones do. And then just kind of jockeying my stop up with higher lows because this is a pretty volatile name. I want to make sure that I captured, a good trend, but also didn't let it turn too much and start an intraday downtrend before, locking in my profits. Selling is definitely something I'm still working on in this case, when it comes to an episodic pivot, earnings gap, whatever you want to call it. With regular trades, I usually look for 2 closes below the daily 21 EMA, but this was more of a performance enhancer trade on an intraday time frame where I'm really looking to be aggressive and get a good profit, but get out before it pulls back too much. And a performance enhancer, and kind of why I deem this a performance enhancer, is I'm already pretty heavily invested in my portfolio. Otherwise, UPST for me is a pretty volatile name. It can, move up, as we saw, 40+%, but it also can pull back 8%. I don't necessarily want to deal with that volatility day to day. I want to kind of balance out my core positions with a name like this and just try to kind of use performance when there is an opportunity like this in a name with a really good earnings gap, episodic pivot setup. So that's kind of why I view this as a performance enhancer. Just a quick trade, get some nice profit cushion that then I can redistribute elsewhere in my account, or look for the next performance enhancer to complement my core positions that I'm more position trading versus a swing day trade just like this. And as I mentioned, completely open to revisiting this next week. Here with Friday, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't too heavy on margin at the close. We are a little bit short-term extended if we take a look at the Qs. Let's go to a daily time frame. And kind of my situational awareness is I don't want to be too heavy up here. I think we are just starting a new market cycle, but we've rallied really hard for 2 straight days. I've got, great exposure already in my Roth and my margin account, and I don't want to get too heavy. I'd love to see this flag out and then reset, kind of form a short-term flag, maybe let the 10 EMA catch up. I think that would create some great chart setups out there. But in terms of taking exposure home on Friday, I'm happy to get UPST off the books for now. And as I mentioned, revisit it later on next week. As I mentioned, this setup is everywhere currently. We've got stocks like Tesla pushing hard, really hard today. You have the day one on this day right here on the 6th, continuation up on the next day, Thursday, and then really expanded here as well on this Friday. We also had PLTR, which had a really nice move, great action. We've got names like Reddit, which I'm currently in right here. You can see it kind of formed that short-term flag, short-term pullback, which is another opportunity. So if you miss a lot of these earnings gaps, you could be waiting for either a day 2 push or a short-term flag or tight area that forms a U-turn after this gap up. That's can basically be what you're waiting for. And this one is acting really nicely. And there's so many different examples. I drop a list down below in the description for you guys to study, because I think this setup is worth investing time into, building a model book of, building your confidence in, because there is really good opportunity when there's a really strong environment like we're currently in, and there are a lot of earnings gaps up. This is probably the most earnings gaps this cycle that I remember in a long time. And there's just many, opportunities out there to profit from moves like this. So hopefully this video is helpful. I just kind of want to help, talk through my trade. It helps me looking back and doing some post analysis, as well as hopefully helping you guys out there who are trying to learn this setup and improve your trading overall. The key part with this, and I think the most difficult part with trading these type of setups, is managing your risk. And for me, looking back on my entries, I think, I'll go back to the 1 minute time frame. This entry was a little bit delayed, the 1 minute opening range breakout. I would like to catch it as it pushed higher, setting my stop at the low of the day. Obviously, that's more of a risk that it can just reverse hard and move lower. But you're often, catching a little bit earlier, and maybe setting your stop under 2%, under 1% even, if you catch it really nicely early on. But I think looking back on this trade, my exit was pretty good in terms of the goals I had for this trade, how I was viewing it as a performance enhancer, and being pretty aggressive while staying with the trend as well. So hopefully this video is helpful. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you have any tips, feedback, whatever, questions about the setup, happy to answer anything I can. And I'll see you guys in future videos. Leave a like down below if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new to the channel, And check out DFU as well. If you haven't yet, the link is down below in the description. And I'll see you guys in future videos. Take care. Bye.